Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'd like to welcome you to the special council meeting of July 8th, 2020. And Judy, if you could go ahead and call the roll, please.
Yes, Hausch,
I'm here.
McQueen. McQueen,
Excuse me.
here. Stokes. I'm not seeing Stokes. Krieger. No Krieger. Okay, Corliss.
Here.
All right, we don't have enough to pass anything at this point, so
So what we know is that Lisa has told us that she's going to join a couple minutes late, and I see Kevin on now.
okay.
Okay.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
All right. I want to begin by, first of all, thanking the village team members who changed their schedules in some cases to allow us to have this meeting. I believe that all council members think it's very important that we continue to make decisions that can help protect our community. And this is certainly something that is urgent to look at. So we have three pieces of legislation that we are going to look at this afternoon. I want to highlight before we get into that, that I think many know that we have had extensive conversations for about 3 months now about the importance of masks and face coverings, and those have certainly intensified over the past month as we've been looking for ways to get people to do the right thing in terms of distancing, hand hygiene, and certainly face coverings. So to that extent—
Thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.
All right, I think we need to mute Mark Heiss. And so to that extent, we have a lot of information now about the varying concerns that folks have, the varying observations that people have made with face coverings downtown, and also different thoughts around enforcement. I think one thing that we have generally come to understand is that almost everyone in the community feels that wearing masks should be a priority, and that we all care about our community. Certainly there are differences, and that's what we're going to focus on today in terms of how or if we enforce what we have started to do with self-compliance. And I think the other piece of that is that we want to make sure that comments today are focused on the legislation at hand. And again, recognizing that we've had a lot of feedback through meetings and letters, and we have all that in front of us. So what we want to really focus on now is how we can potentially take next steps to the resolution, which has been very successful in terms of getting people to put their masks on when they're downtown. We want to look at how we can move forward and really analyze what's the best approach for the village to get even more behavior that we want to see for public safety, while balancing some other concerns such as social justice. So with that, I think Mary Ann McQueen, if you want to review the petitions and communications, and then we'll get into the legislation.
Brian, will we have time for agenda review? I would like.
Sure.
So do you want me to go through the letters first or ask my question?
Let's go ahead and do the PNC, and then we can add agenda review right after.
Okay, so we had letter from Jean K supporting a mask ordinance. Letter or email, these are all emails. Email from Kate Mooneyham not supporting closing Short Street, as well as Maria Booth not supporting closing Short Street for people to congregate. Communication from Catherine Vanderheiden, thanking council, weighing the options and her concern about safety downtown. Letter from Mary Alice Wilson, supporting an ordinance. Sue Carr, supporting an ordinance. Amy Walmsley, wanting to have safe busking and an ordinance. Diane Davis and Cindy Shaw, supporting ordinance. Nancy Mellon, Leslie Lippert, Margaret Kobernick, Ellen Hoover, all wanting to see an ordinance for masks, and Lisa Krieger regarding her support of safe busking.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. And we normally do have a review of the agenda, so let's go ahead and do that next.
Yes, I have a question. Why the ordinance regarding busking was removed?
Because,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Judy, you can go ahead and answer it.
Well, I actually sent you an email explaining that, that I subsumed the busking issue into the vending issue, the vendor issue. If you read the updated 2020
12.
12, it contains language that includes buskers, solicitors, people going door to door, anyone who's soliciting donation or gratuities.
Okay, well, I will weigh in as supporting no busking in downtown. So, and that's a different thing.
I
see that isn't, that's been removed, so it's not an option, but I see that as a different thing than vendors selling things, and I don't think we should have busking given this time period. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
And I think there'll be room to talk about that because the language of the draft ordinance does accommodate that to some degree, but it is an important part of the discussion. Okay, anything else about the agenda? All right, if not, we're going to move into legislation. And I think it's important to get a few things as overviews before we actually talk about each piece. First of all, I get is Colin Altman on the call? Okay.
Check in with him.
Josue, do you want to share a little bit about what we've learned from Greene County Public Health that I think helps frame the conversation to some extent?
Certainly. All three of us, that being Brian Carlson, Colin Altman, and myself, have been following the numbers at the county level and have been in conversations with Greene County Public Health on where the trends are heading. We see a spike in the numbers. I think you've all heard of the increases coming from Fairborn, Beaver Creek, and Xenia. So we anticipate that as tomorrow these numbers are reevaluated and the risk for the county is reevaluated, we may be entering into a level 3 risk assessment, which would trigger a few things. One of them being the mandatory mask requirement for the county. In a nutshell, that's the conversation and the analysis that we've been able to do over the last 2 days. Brian, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I'll extend off of that. Thanks, Josue. Carlson. Yeah, Carlson, go ahead, please.
No, I don't really have anything to add, Josue. I can't tell you. I just looked. It looks like that the level may be rising as a whole in the county. It is countywide. Yellow Springs still only has the one confirmed in town. They're doing well and under quarantine. So that's the update. I don't really have any more information than you gave, Josue.
And to put the number in a bit more context, we had gone a little over 4 weeks. We're going into our 5th week of 0 cases in the village. And over the weekend, I believe it was Sunday, we had our first positive number in almost 5 weeks. So there was a good stretch of time that we went without having any cases, but we're now at 1 again in the village, and with the numbers rising in other municipalities within the county.
So one thing that I also want to put into context, we, I believe, have the letter from Greene County Public Health in the packet. Certainly, we can make that available, but it does highlight what Josue mentioned, that once a county moves into level 3, the red level, that masks become required. And essentially, they become required if you can't physically distance outdoors or for indoor and a similar aspect. So some folks, I think, have heard me highlight in meetings as well as on social media that a key reason that Dayton did pass an ordinance was because by Montgomery County moving into the red zone, it then became required. So it makes sense, I think, for any municipality to then explain how that requirement is going to be enforced. And to me, this is now a signal that I think will contribute to our discussion on the legislation, because at some point, if we do move into level 3, if that happens, and I hope it does not, we should be prepared as a village for how we are going to enforce those requirements. Otherwise, I think comments from Chief Josue and Mayor Pam can come into the context of the legislation that we're going to discuss next. If any other council members have something they'd like to add that is kind of an overview before we look at the first ordinance, I'd be happy to hear those now.
Brian, the only thing I have to say is I also am keeping a spreadsheet from the Greene County Health Department. And since 6/24, the increase in cases in the county is 93, with only 3 new hospitalizations and no new deaths. And of the 276 total active cases since they started keeping the stats, 164 of those people are presumed recovered. It's 0.001% of the population of Greene County. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Laura. Lisa, did you have anything you wanted to say initially? Okay. Marianne? Nope. Kevin? Okay. All right. So seeing none, I will ask Judy Kidner to, yeah, Judy, I think it would be good to read this one in full, please.
All right, here we go. This is requiring all vendors and all persons soliciting for donation or gratuity in the village of Yellow Springs to wear a facial covering and declaring an emergency. Whereas COVID-19 is a respiratory disease that can result in serious illness or death and can be easily spread from person to person. Whereas the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has reported over 2.93 million cases of COVID-19 in the United States, resulting in over 126,369 deaths. And whereas on March 9th, 2020, the Ohio Department of Health announced a state of emergency for the effects of COVID-19 in the state of Ohio. Whereas on March 9th, 2020, Governor Mike DeWine signed an executive order declaring a state of emergency for the entire state of Ohio in relation to COVID-19, pursuant to the governor's authority vested in him by the Constitution and the laws of the state of Ohio, and in accordance with revised code section 5502.22. And whereas the CDC reports that people are most contagious when they are most symptomatic, however, some spread is possible before an individual may show symptoms. And whereas on March 22nd, 2020, under direction of Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Ohio Department of Health Director Amy Acton, MD, issued an order requiring all Ohioans to stay in their homes to prevent the further spread of COVID-19. until April 6th, 2020. And the order was extended until May 1, 2020, and was amended on April 30th, May 20th, and May 22nd, 2020 to allow businesses to open with the requirement that facial coverings or masks be worn by all employees except in certain circumstances. And whereas on May 22nd, 2020, the travel ban order found in the April 30th, 2020 order was rescinded, and now more people are traveling throughout the state, Greene County, and within the village. And whereas on April 20th, 2020, Council for the Village of Yellow Springs declared a local emergency based on the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas a local and statewide state of emergency continues to exist with limits on mass gatherings and strong recommendations to physically distance. And whereas as a result of the above described emergency, there is a continuing and urgent need to protect all citizens and guests of Yellow Springs from the risks related to the COVID-19 pandemic through the protection provided by physically distancing, wearing facial coverings, and regularly washing or sanitizing hands. And whereas Council for the Village of Yellow Springs does hereby recognize that the village population is comprised of many people who are considered to be at risk if they contract the COVID-19 virus, and that Yellow Springs is a community frequented by persons who travel from locations both outside the village and the county. And whereas food and goods vendors are a regular feature of the B1 business district, and whereas on May 14th, Amy Acton, MD, MPH signed the Director's Dine Safe Ohio order that reopened restaurants and bars to dine-in service with exceptions. And on June 5, Dr. Acton signed the amended Dine Safe order applicable to both dine-in and outdoor dining, which requires specific precautionary measures. Now, therefore, Council for the Village of Yellow Springs hereby ordains that Section 1. All food vendors operating in the village are hereby required to fashion a readily cleanable, non-porous barrier separating the vendor from the public, which barrier shall contain a pass-through cutout for the exchange of money and food items. These barriers shall be required until a declaration from the governor or the Department of Health that a state of emergency no longer exists. Section 2, any food vendor found to be non-compliant will be ordered closed until they can demonstrate compliance. Section 3, all non-food vendors are required to wear a mask when staffing their booth or table. Section 4, all persons soliciting donation or gratuity for any reason, including street performers and musicians, are required to wear a mask at all times and to perform only at locations where they are 6 feet away from foot traffic when engaged in performance. Section 5, any person who violates Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, or Section 4 of this ordinance will be issued a written warning and asked to wear a facial covering immediately on the first infraction reported or observed. A second violation will result in a citation for violating Codified Ordinance 660.02. A third violation will result in citation and may result in revocation of the permit issued under Chapter 860 of the Codified Ordinances for a period of not less than 6 months, to be determined by the Chief of Police. Section 6, this order is hereby declared to be an emergency measure under home rule power granted by the village charter and immediately necessary to preserve the public interest and for the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens and visitors to the village.
All right, thank you, Judy. And can I get a motion, please?
I move.
And a second?
I'm gonna
Okay, I think Kevin won that one. Okay, so I would also like to go ahead and open the public hearing because we are reading this as an emergency, which is part of the reason that we called this meeting. In terms of procedure, I'll also highlight that since this is an emergency meeting, any legislation needs to be passed by a supermajority. So that would mean 4 council members would need to vote for any of the legislation to pass. So I'm going to open the discussion up first to council members. Then I want to hear from our justice system representatives, and then we will go from there. So Marianne, why don't you begin, because part of what you said earlier relates to this, certainly.
Yes. You know, I guess we all, as Brian, as you said, everyone on council, of course, is concerned about the safety of everyone downtown. And my personal sense is that because of this disease, it's really changed and should change the nature of how we view downtown. So for me, being downtown means going and getting something and returning. And of course, I'm talking as a resident. The idea of having someone busking downtown first of all, if they were singing, it's probably pretty difficult with a mask. I don't see how they can really be 6 feet away, especially if they, I mean, part of the reason why they're busking is to make money. So that it's unlikely that they're going to have their where they want to get money 6 feet away. But second, but even more important, it invites people to hang around. And my concern is that when you're downtown, if you're moving, that's one thing. If you're hanging around other people, that's another thing. So that's one concern I have with this ordinance. The other is that I don't see anything in here. Maybe it's subsumed in another ordinance for people who are vendors, of making sure that anyone who's coming to their table is maintaining 6-foot distance, and that they have to have the little things out by their station. Maybe that's already somewhere and I'm just not seeing it. Those are my concerns about this ordinance. I support the idea of people who are stationary downtown outside wearing masks.
All right, thanks, Marianne. Lisa Krieger, I know that you put something in writing and have some thoughts about this.
Right, I do. Thank you. So I think it's important to consider how we handle stationary individuals, vendors, and buskers downtown, and that's why I voted yes on Monday night to look at an ordinance. And upon reflecting, I really think that it makes sense that it's part and parcel with the requirement to just put on a mask downtown. I actually happen to sing in a choir called the World House Choir. We've been rehearsing outside, physically distanced, singing in masks, and it's fine to sing in a mask. I got kind of a muffled sound, but it's completely doable. I know it from personal experience. And I do believe that if there is some economic opportunity, if the buskers still are, making a little money, that's a job, and I am not going to take that away from them. And as a community member, it's not just for tourists. I think it is part of being downtown. I think that there are places where a person cannot be and be 6 feet away and stationary wearing a mask. So for example, right next to the Tom's driveway, that's a narrow sidewalk. You wouldn't be able to position yourself there, but there may be places that there could be. And we might even be able to consider some spots that would be marked with an X and a ring around it, where it could be a designated spot for a busker to perform. And I think there's things that we can do that are maybe a little bit more creative, that don't make it like illegal and don't go after particular individuals who are part of the fabric of our community. So in that spirit, I propose, when you're downtown in Yellow Springs, put on a mask. And that would affect buskers as well. But I did think that, there should be, some penalty attached to this, because I know that right now with just the resolution in place, it's like, put on a mask. No, okay, really, put on a mask. Really, no. So at least this gives some penalty if a busker or a vendor doesn't comply with this ordinance. So that was my thinking on this. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Kevin Stokes?
Yes, thank you, Brian. So I agree with what's been said, and in particular, the fact that we've, to Judy's point, subsumed the busking ordinance into this one. I think it makes our intent more clear. In other words, we're not anti-busking, as it were. But excuse me, to Lisa's point, where we can accommodate busking because of the particulars, and she's right. You think about where you tend to see buskers; they happen to be on a more narrow part of the sidewalk, and so it is also not our intention to disable busking in general. It just does create, another circumstance that can be handled. So I think overall, I think it puts more of a positive stance on things. Certainly making efforts to propose what enforcement looks like, I think is certainly appropriate, and I think we're doing the right thing there. So overall, I think it took what could have been seen as a negative stance or an anti-busking, just using that as example, and I think it just puts things in a positive light, moving in a positive direction, but does not negate, the particulars of the difficulties that a busker might have in finding a location. But if we did do the kinds of things that Lisa is suggesting, with the X in the circle, in support of them, I think, again, that's very, very appropriate.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Laura Curlis?
Thank you. So a lot of the buskers don't sing, they just play. So then what's the problem? The problem is that they're stationary on a sidewalk in the public right of way where people have to pass. And so some people are really uncomfortable passing them. They think they'll get the disease outside. And then I started to think about other stationary people in the public right of way. And we have a lot of them. And I circulated a email to council that we have people dining on the sidewalk who are stationary without masks because that's part of a business. These are the customers. We have bench seating in the downtown in the right of way where people are sitting stationary. And I believe it raises a substantive due process right, as government has to treat equally situated people the same. So certainly with regard to customers at a business that is selling food and they're stationary, we have to think real hard about why would we require masks at all times of the buskers and not others. The other thing is, I have a lot of other amendments and I might still be willing to vote for this, but I have a number of amendments that I would make. But the one I don't understand is almost all the ordinances I looked at, if you can be, no matter who you are, if you can be socially distanced from others, whether they're people you're with or a busker or people on the side, if you can be 6 feet away, you don't have to wear a mask. That's like one of the exceptions. The exceptions you see typically are autism, asthma, people who wear hearing aids, other mental health or medical diagnoses that are counterindicated. And then this, if you can't be more, you can have to wear a mask, or you don't have to wear it if you can be more than 6 feet away. So I would really like to see these exceptions in the ordinance. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Laura. Brianne, are there any comments that you want to make at this point about this piece of legislation?
In terms of the exceptions, the solicitation and vendor angle is kind of inherently acknowledging that these are going to be situations where there is no possibility of maintaining the 6 feet of social distance because it's being either a business or a gratuity sort of transaction where they're going to be accepting payment for selling goods or food, or they're getting money for busking. So they're, again, sort of inherently going to not be able to physical distance. As far as the exceptions go, that is kind of rolled into the other ordinances in terms of what exceptions are. We have to accommodate exceptions even if we don't expressly list them.
Okay, thank you. So now I'd like to hear from Chief Carlson about his thoughts about this legislation.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. I just lost the So I think the thing that I'm particularly pleased about is that it's not, we're not omitting the buskers, which is partly what I interpreted when we were talking the other night. So section 4, all persons soliciting donation or gratuity for any reason, including street performers and musicians, required to wear a mask at all times and perform only at locations where they are 6 feet away from foot traffic. So that, kind of plays to what Laura was just saying. If that 6 feet of distancing can be maintained, then these folks are still able to make a living and our villagers are still able to enjoy their goods and services. So I think that's a really good part of this. From the policing standpoint, as far as enforcement, I will say this with all the language that we'll be speaking of today. We will work as we always do in a resolution-oriented manner, mediation in spirit, and the point is to create a safer environment for all citizens and people who visit the village. So I'm feeling pretty good about the way this one reads. And if anybody has any questions regarding this one, please, now's a good opportunity. We can do them with each one.
All right, thank you, Chief. Mayor Kanine.
There's an advantage to going last in reflecting on this particular ordinance, and I'm not going to repeat what other people have said. I think all the unique points have been brought out. I will say that I was very pleased that this went from eliminating busking to allowing for the use of masks. I believe in our village there are many places that would allow for a 6-foot distance, for the busker to keep his or her money box close by, for passersby to enjoy the music, and for masks to be worn in that case. Having watched what happened last Saturday at the ambassador table with the busker right across the street and people moving out into the street because that person was not wearing a mask. So, as with other speakers, and certainly Chief Carlson, who went right before me, I'm very comfortable with this ordinance. And I think this was one that would be more black and white as far as enforcement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. Josue Salmeron?
Thank you, Brian. Just as Brian Carlson and Mayor Kanine have shared, I think this is a great improvement on how we're trying to resolve a conflict, an issue, without being too harsh or looking out for unintended consequences. So I won't go into it any further than that on what we're trying to solve here. What I do want to highlight is that we have one of the best police enforcement mechanisms out there. We have a great police team, and I think that this is an added tool in our toolbox, and we'll do it with resolution focus, and the kindness of matters.
All right, thanks, Josue. And I agree that, enforcement starts with the resolution-oriented approach. I like the use of that term, that our officers have and have had before the resolution. It will continue regardless of how we evolve with this. I want to say 2 quick things that I think summarize what I've heard so far, and then if we have some citizen comments that are things we haven't heard in the past, we will be open to those as well. So what I'm hearing is that there are 2 issues here. One is sort of the general limits on space downtown. And that's why, what Mary Ann highlighted and is also of concern to me is that when activities are happening on the sidewalk, and honestly, we might need to think about some of the dining, the few tables where there's dining on the sidewalk and if there's enough room there. But specifically with street musicians, I agree it adds to the flair. I'm not sure that, this is the time to promote a lot of those activities, but I think my main concern is being able to not compromise the space that's already limited. And this is why I think the resolution does address that by saying you have to be essentially 6 feet away from the sidewalks where the foot traffic is. I've always thought it's great for folks to set up in places where they have a lot of space and they can distance. And then the second issue is that interaction between anyone that is involved in an activity that basically money is exchanged. And I think this is why the idea that those vendors or buskers or whoever are wearing masks, because presumably they want people to approach them to make a purchase or make a donation or whatever. So those are two different issues. I think this ordinance does look at both of those. And with all the things that we're doing, there may need to be tweaking, but I agree. I think it's very straightforward what the enforcement would look like. But I do want to make sure that we're recognizing that there are two issues related to public safety that are going to also be impacted in the next two ordinances that we discuss.
Brian, can I
Yes,
say
please.
something? Yeah. So I'm just want to drill down a little bit on this. The section 4 is saying that people who, whether they're street performers, well, it's particularly talking about street performers, I guess, but the same true with vendors. And frankly, I guess it needs to be true of people sitting, eating, that, I mean, when they're eating, they can't wear a mask, but they have to wear a mask at all time, and they have to be 6 feet apart. Mask, 6 feet apart. So that means that, like the guy who sells jewelry up against the senior center, that can't happen. So one comment I have is, I think it might make sense for us to designate those places in the village where, if it's a vendor or a performer, where they can be, because I don't think there's anywhere on the sidewalk that would work. The other thing, as you pointed up, Brian, maybe we're going to have to relook at people sitting and eating on the sidewalk, because clearly they don't have a mask on then. And lastly, I do want to thank Laura for the points she brought up, in particular about treating one group of persons differently than another, allowing people to sit on the sidewalk and eat and not allowing buskers. So those are my comments.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. So I see a question from Megan Bachman. Brianne, do you see that question as well in the chat?
I can read it.
Okay.
Yeah, the question is, does this cover those playing music downtown
Yes.
who are donations?
Yep.
That would be up to council.
Okay. So as it reads, though, it appears that it would not, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Do we have any other questions or comments from citizens?
Yeah, Brian, this is Mark Heiss.
Hi, Mark.
I just wanted to point out the gentleman, the jewelry vendor that's in front of the senior center, actually recognized the hazard, and he moved himself over into the alcove at the credit union.
Yes, I saw that over the weekend. All right. Any other questions or comments?
Brian, Karen.
Yes, Karen. Yep.
I would like, my consideration on this is that the vendors, whether they're food vendors, craft vendors, or buskers, is to treat them as businesses. And I think that this particular ordinance does it. It follows along as is detailed in the ordinance. It follows on with what the state has declared related to businesses and mask requirements. So I think that separates it a little bit from the discussion about the equality or potentially how does this impact a regular citizen when they're eating or doing something like that. I'm not saying that doesn't potentially require a discussion, but I'm just saying I see this as commerce separate from other types of activities that might be happening downtown.
Yes, thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments from citizens? I am not seeing any. Josue, is there anything you're seeing that I'm missing?
There, let me see, I'm looking at Facebook, nothing on Facebook. On YouTube, there's a few comments. Would you like me to read them?
Sure.
Diane Davis, shouting, laughing, singing, coughing, sneezing, all propel droplets as much as 30 feet, according to the science. Mask and social distancing are essential. Kate Hamilton, make it for everyone. Jane HR, if people can wear face masks for medical reasons, they can wear a face shield, exclamation mark.
Okay, is that it? Oh, go
I
ahead.
just,
People
Since
gathering donations don't follow under this. That's a question mark. Sorry, it's a question. People gathering donations don't follow under this.
yes, they do.
Yeah, they would.
And I would just point us back to, we've got 3 of these to get through. Unless someone identifies themselves as specifically making a comment to council, first and last name, affiliation with the village, I do not think we should be reading the comments.
Okay, yeah, and I think also some of the things we're discussing will roll into the next ordinances. So, you know, I was open to just hearing a little bit more, but I think it sounds like we've covered all the issues. So final comments or thoughts from council members before we close the public hearing?
Yeah, Brian, this ordinance would apply to the farmer's market. And the thing that struck me as unnecessary is the requirement in section 1 to put up the barrier with the pass-through. I mean, the farmer's market seems to be working pretty well because it says in the village, all food vendor, and it doesn't say prepared food or raw food or any, and some of those are prepared out there.
Okay. So this one's not limited to the downtown?
Right.
Mhm.
I think that's a really good catch. Thank you for that, Laura. You always have that keen eye. And I do think that, I mean, that just proves how I was connecting words without thinking that we were talking about the business district.
Mhm.
And so, I
Yep.
mean, I would agree that something like the farmer's market is not what I'm focusing on here.
So
Yeah.
that we can correct that by saying all food vendors who are unable to wear a mask. The reason for the plexiglass kind of language there is that, for example, Miguel's Tacos, right? You're cooking, you're over a grill, you cannot wear a facial covering, and then you turn to the window to hand out food and take money. The advice from the health department when I spoke with them was they did not want such a person taking off and putting on, taking off and putting on a mask. That's a worse thing than not wearing a mask at all. So they then suggested the barrier. So if we simply add language that says who are unable to wear a mask, I think we're covering the farmer's market.
Okay, but I guess I think that we are focused on the central business district. So I think.
No, this one does not specify.
I'm saying, but that's my understanding of the intent has been that we're focused on the central
The
business.
central business district's a different ordinance.
Yes.
So just let me chime in here, Brian. Maybe I'm backpedaling, but like, so for example, let's say a food truck decides to set up as part of the farmer's market, right? We still would want to follow the advice of the Department of Health around those kind of plexiglass protections for those kind of food trucks. So maybe we are setting ourselves up for a trouble in that eventuality that food trucks might sometime be right outside of the central, business district. And we should amend, as Judy suggests, to specify for food vendors who cannot wear a mask.
Yeah, it's interesting because related to that, I did get a note from someone before this meeting that highlighted that, with public health and the sort of going to level 3, it would not distinguish between the central business district. So, okay, so
Brian, there's also a comment on the chat from Naomi Hyatt. Highlights where other areas where this department will be applicable.
right, right. Okay, so I guess that is part of this decision then is, and also keeping in mind that depending on what happens with numbers. Okay, Laura, you had some other, you mentioned potentially some other changes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see the exceptions specifically listed because, officers shouldn't have to guess. All the common ones need to be actually in the ordinance. And then I think the section 2 should be moved down to section 5 as a paragraph B. I mean, I could make these modifications, but I think really what we ought to do is give a little more time and let Brianne work on this a little bit more and bring it back at our next council meeting. But I also think the penalty section is not the direction I would go. I wouldn't go the criminal route. I'd go the infraction route, which is civil with fines. I mean, a second violation is basically an M. I looked it up. It's an M3, which is 60 days in jail or $500 fine potential. Now, would we ever do that? I don't know. Mayor Pam can't say because she's not allowed to prejudge cases. But of course, this is ripe for diversion, where she brings people in and says, "Will you sign like a last chance agreement where you say I promise to wear a mask and let them go without the fine or a conviction?" And remember, I don't want young people getting criminal records out of this. So I think we really need to back down this section 5 with all these criminal penalties.
Okay. Can we stop on? Go ahead.
So
I was just going to say I'd like Brianne to address the civil versus criminal approaches.
Sure. Your issue with civil enforcement is going to be if it is, as we discussed, a person who's engaged in commerce. Are you going to be having some sort of organizational liability imposed, or are you going to be citing a person, a natural person, who is not wearing a mask, who's not maintaining physical distance, who does not have the barrier? So if you make it a civil infraction on an entity, a business entity that's not a natural person, you would still have to serve them in compliance with the civil rules of procedure. But by the time you do that, you're out of speedy trial requirements, because the other issue is once it goes through mayor's court, if someone such as a business wants to contest their ticket, we don't have trials at mayor's court, and it would get kicked over to Xenia Municipal Court. So it's council's prerogative whether to make it a civil infraction or a criminal infraction. In looking at council trying to fashion a penalty for this, the other consideration is what do we already have on the books? And the 660 ordinance that is currently there specifically addresses reasonable efforts to prevent the spread of contagion, which is what this is trying to accomplish.
So people, anyway, when I say civil, I mean, infractions like traffic tickets aren't technically criminal, they're civil. People aren't getting criminal records like with an M1, M2.
It depends on the traffic offense, but yes. I mean, it's council's prerogative whether to say, and you can scale it. Say the first offense will be a warning, second offense will be a civil infraction, and then scale it all the way up for a repeat or subsequent offense. If someone is not going to comply no matter what, you could sanction it as a criminal then.
Well, they're losing that section 2. They're going to be ordered closed, could be, and then they're going to lose their license for a period of time.
and that was part of the discussion I had with Chief yesterday, was how many solicitors, vendors, et cetera, are actually issued those licenses under Section 860.
I like the idea of not voting on this today and having Brianne work, I don't know, maybe it was Laura, the chief, whomever. I mean, we've had a fairly robust conversation, I think.
Okay. Other thoughts, Lisa, Kevin?
Well, I mean, I'll defer, but I just have to say that it's very, very difficult for me to not just say, like, put on a mask. It's not that complicated. Put on a mask. I don't know why this is so circuitous. Thank you.
Okay. Kevin?
I just, in section 4, I want to make sure we're being intentional here from a fairness perspective, where it says are required to wear a mask at all times and to perform only at locations. Did we actually intend to make that and as opposed to or?
Yes.
Yeah, it was to
Yeah.
accommodate those two areas, right? One is the crowding of the sidewalk, and two is the interaction between someone involved in commerce and people. Yeah.
Very great. Thank you.
And I do think it's good. I think this is important to do this. Yeah, if everyone wore a mask, yeah, but they're not. That's why we're doing it. And to someone's point, I forget who it is, if we're going to have our police go up and enforce this, which is we're doing it, then it has to be very clear.
Right. Karen, you had something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, something Brianne said caused me a little concern, wondering if for these vendors that are on private property, if they weren't complying, if there might be some penalty on the property owner. So that would be a concern I would have, is if there's at any point, because most of these vendors and buskers actually, with the new rules that are being set up, are going to be on private property as opposed to public property.
There's no provision for a property owner to receive a penalty under this particular ordinance.
Yeah. And, you know, I see a couple other really good comments. You know, one of them, we actually are not waiting necessarily for Greene County to go into the red zone. And I talked about at the beginning of the meeting that we are potentially going to be proactive about that based on decisions that we make. That's at least what we're talking about. And we also have talked about opening up space, including sectioning off parking lot or parking spaces downtown. And I think this is getting us to think more about the need for doing that. But that has been discussed since the beginning of this, really. Okay, so I am hearing several changes, and I'm just going to go through what I heard. And Laura, correct me if I missed something. Listing the exceptions, which we can easily do because we have that in the other ordinance. The issue about going in the civil versus the criminal direction, I personally support that. I'd also like to find a way to have this only go through mayor's court if possible, or limit that as much as possible. We've got the plastic shield exception that Judy mentioned to accommodate the farmer's market, which I think makes sense and seems to be the law. And then one other thing that we did not talk about, but in the other ordinance, is the mention that in lieu of fines, it can be community service. And I think that we should include that here as well. So Laura, I feel like, did I miss one thing maybe? I know you talked about moving the sections.
Yeah, so section 2 says any food vendor found to be non-compliant will be ordered closed until they can demonstrate compliance. I would just make that paragraph B of section 5. That's a penalty item, and I'd just move it down there.
Okay.
And I would rewrite paragraph A to, again, in the direction you just said. The period of time that somebody could get their permit revoked, I think 6 months is pretty long, and I think it should be changed to like 2 months. Again, most of these are outdoor vendors, and the weather's going to get them before we do, so probably, but 2 months or until the same language that you have, I think, up in section 1, for 2 months or until a declaration from the governor or the Department of Health that a state of emergency no longer exists, or whichever's earlier, who knows, maybe some miracle will happen. And because this could go into next season if we don't get a vaccine. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I make a suggestion? That, I mean, you have to take a vote on every amendment.
Right.
So there might be either a motion to pass it with the minor who are unable to wear mask piece, or to take it back, make the amendments and bring it back on the 20th, because we're talking about a number of fairly significant amendments that I think are hard for people to absorb on the fly.
That's what I would prefer.
Okay. And I'm hearing that from a couple council members. I will say from where I'm at, most of these do not seem to be hard to wrap my head around in terms of, I mean, there's a potential change around enforcement, which is already in the other ordinances. And the other things, I mean, I think we've talked about the major policy issues that we're getting at here, and how this, relates to promoting public safety. So I am actually ready to take a vote. I understand we might not get a super majority, but I think that, I guess I feel like we have enough that we could pass something now.
Brian, the other ordinance also has problems with the criminalization. I mean,
I agree.
Not any better, that much better.
Yeah, well, I know, but I mean, I want to change that for sure. I support changing that in the other one as well. All right, so I guess I'm going to move forward with calling votes, and then we'll see what happens.
Brian, can I ask a
You're going to have to vote
process question?
Yes,
on each amendment, every
Right.
single amendment. that you
I
make.
understand, Brianne. Go ahead, Marianne.
So, you and the lawyers in this may understand all this. I do not. But it sounds to me like, Brian, you were saying, even though you don't agree with section 5, you want to take a vote on this. Am I
No,
correct?
we would be making the suggested amendments. And so section 5, the major change is allowing for going in a civil direction and allowing for community service in lieu of fines.
So you're suggesting making whatever amendments have been proposed, and I don't have a list of them.
Yeah.
And then,
But you also have to specify what that fine is going to be.
Right. Okay. All right. I'm not saying that this is, I understand it's complicated, and there are a lot of different issues that we're talking about, but I think it could make a big difference this weekend and next weekend before we have a council meeting. So.
Well, I guess the problem that I see is that if you pass this as an emergency, there is no further opportunity for the public to weigh in. There's no ability to referendum. You take that off the table. I think it's pretty critical that it be made very clear what's being passed. So if somebody can pull off in the background and reorder these sections and redo section 5 and rewrite this thing so that it can be read again, the sections can be read again so that it's clear what you guys are voting on. I'm hearing from Marianne that she's not clear what she'd be voting on.
I can do it.
Okay,
All right, First Amendment, Section 1. After the word vendors, so all food vendors, insert, I'm making a motion for this amendment, who cannot wear a mask. So those would be five words added. We're going to leave in the village, right? So that's my motion on Section 1. I think we could take a vote on that.
okay. I'll second that motion. And Judy, could you call the roll?
Queen,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Ouch.
Yes.
I make a motion that we move Section 2 and renumber it as paragraph B of Section 5, and that the first paragraph of Section 5 becomes paragraph A, and then I'll address that when we get there.
I second that.
Okay, Judy, call the roll, please.
Yeah, Curlis,
Yes.
Stokes.
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Queen,
Yes.
Ouch.
Yes.
I have no changes to Section 3 or 4 unless someone else does.
Would Section 3 be renumbered Section 2?
Correct. Yes, well, yeah.
You would have to move to amend that then.
I don't know that
I
we've
move.
done that before, but
Yeah, I make that motion.
I'll
Can
second.
we do conclude in that, the other sections?
Yes.
Okay.
So every section is going to be one number up.
Right.
And do we get a second on that?
I'll second it.
There you go.
Okay, so Stokes.
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Queen,
Yes.
Ouch.
Yes.
Okay. I make a motion that we, now I'm going to mess up our numbers. I'm so sorry. A new Section 5. This would be the exceptions to mask wearing. And these are exceptions that I've seen in other ordinances from many other cities, okay? So I would say masks do not need to be worn by persons if otherwise contrary to law, like OSHA, the food regulations. So if otherwise contrary to law, if they have a mental health or medical diagnosis that would contraindicate wearing a mask, hearing aids, children under the age of 10, when unable to be 6 feet or more from others, when actively eating or drinking.
Well, sorry, go ahead. That is different language than your other ordinances where those exceptions are listed. It might be simpler if you just airlift the exceptions out of the other two ordinances and put them into this ordinance so you are operating consistently. Otherwise, you're enforcing things differently.
Mhm.
Oh,
More-
okay. All right.
Does that exception list work for you?
Except under the age of 4. I mean, I've seen it 2, 6, 10. I mean, I'd make it 10. I would make it.
Your resolution says age 4. That's why that,
Yeah, I think we should update it to 10 because that's also what will happen. That's what happens when you go into level 3.
Okay.
They specifically say age 10.
Okay, so I'll change my motion. The motion is to add a Section 5 that would mirror the exemptions section in the proposed ordinance 2020-13, except change age 4 to age 10.
I'll second. Judy, call the roll, please.
Krieger,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Queen,
Yes,
Tausch.
Yes.
I make a motion to amend what is currently section 5, but which will be section 6.
no, 4.
Well, we just made a new section 5 that lists all the exemptions.
Oh, that was a separate section?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, I didn't understand.
Oh,
No, but
maybe that
still,
is-
it would still be
Sorry.
5.
That's the new section 4. This is still section 5. So I moved to amend section 5. And let's see. We'll have to, first of all, remove section 2 because that no longer, well, no, everything's moved up. Section 2. We remove.
Yeah, that would all be good.
I think it would still be good.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
that,
it
like you
should
said,
still be good.
exemptions was section 4,
Yep.
and now we're doing subpoint B of section 5.
Yeah, so that goes on, will be issued a written warning and asked to wear a facial covering immediately on the first infraction reported observed. Fine with me. I don't know about anybody else. Second violation, after the word violation, I would put will be an infraction and subject to a $30 fine. Period.
Okay?
A third violation will result in a citation and a $50 fine and may result in revocation of the permit issued under Chapter 860 of the Codified Ordinances for a period of not less than, I would change 6 to 2. And I would add, or until a declaration from the governor or Department of Health that a state of emergency no longer exists, comma, whichever is earlier. And I would strike to be determined by the police chief, because I don't think the chief doesn't determine that whether the permit gets pulled. I think first the mayor's got to find him guilty, and then that would be a part of the penalty, that their permit could be pulled.
You also need clarified distinction. Food vendors do not get an 860 permit necessarily. 860s for goods. Vendor permits, some people say vendor's license, they mean the permits that are actually issued by county, or if they're a transient vendor, the state of Ohio. So this is the local permit under 860. The village does not have authority to revoke the vendor's license that's issued by the county or the state.
Yeah, I would strike issued under Chapter 860, and I would say revocation of any local permit, because the buskers have a permit too. Or permit or agreement. I don't know what we're calling it these days, but
Right.
those would be my proposed changes.
Okay, is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, Judy, if you could call the roll?
Stokes,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Queen,
Yes,
Krieger,
Yes.
Tausch.
Yes. Okay, so I think at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing because I had not done that yet. And then any final comments before we potentially call a vote on the amended ordinance?
I appreciate all of the work has been in the past and that we've done over the last, whatever it is, half hour or whatever.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura, for stepping up and just walking us through
Yeah.
the process.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anything else?
Brian, can you hear me? We may have breaking news that the county has lifted its state of emergency.
We cannot hear you very well, Josue.
We may have breaking news that the county has lifted their state of emergency already.
Okay,
Level 3, I'm looking to confirm it. Megan's online, she relayed the message. So Megan, if you have it handy, could you jump on? I don't have.
That's what I was told a few weeks ago. I'd have to confirm it again.
Okay. All right.
Wait,
So-
I'm sorry, I'm not following that. You just said Greene County lifted their state of emergency. Is there language in this ordinance that references Greene County that we need to change?
No. Well,
No.
So I'm not sure why we're,
Right. Okay, so I think we're, does anyone want to make a motion?
I move that we accept the ordinance 2020-12 as amended.
I'll second.
Second.
Okay, Judy?
Krieger,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Hausch.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thanks everyone for working through that. Very good discussion. I think this is a really important step forward. And so now, Judy, I'm not sure about the best way to do this, but I think if we could just read it in with the sections and not the whereases.
Excellent idea.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And we will
Okay.
also, Josue will share that on the screen as well.
Well, okay. So this is requiring facial covering in the central business district and declaring an emergency. And the sections are as follows. Section 1, all persons within the area of the village zone central business district shall be, hold on. Hold on, wrong ordinance.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, it was correct. I'm sorry, we changed some language. So all persons within the area of the Village Zone Central Business District shall be required to maintain physical distance of at least 6 feet of separation from non-group members, regularly sanitize and wash hands, and wear a facial covering provided expressly for that purpose. The latter requirement exempts individuals with documented medical conditions, which prevent wearing of a facial covering in children under the age of, and we're going to change that to 10 years old. Section 2, Section 660.16 of the Code of the Village of Yellow Springs is hereby created to read as follows.
So Judy, let's just hold there. Is it okay if we just, that we don't read definitions and exemptions and just focus on the other pieces?
Yes, it is okay, though I would encourage you to read them silently on your own. So do we go for enforcement penalty? Do you want those read or no?
Let's do B and
D, enforcement?
yeah, yep, and E.
Okay, so section D, enforcement. No anonymous complaints shall serve as the basis for probable cause for investigation. Any person may report an alleged violation to the Yellow Springs Police Department to request enforcement, but shall, as a condition of such reporting, agree to serve as a competent eyewitness in any proceedings before Yellow Springs Mayor's Court or Xenia Municipal Court. Any village personnel who observe a violation as an eyewitness on village-owned property or public places may issue a verbal or written warning in lieu of citation if law enforcement officer is unavailable to respond within a reasonable period of time, which may result in multiple warnings, but not necessarily an increased penalty. Section E, penalty. Any person who violates the provisions of Section V without claiming an exemption shall be issued a written warning and advised to wear a facial covering immediately on the first infraction reported or observed. A documented second violation, if observed by law enforcement or confirmed through investigation of a complaint or warning, may result in a citation for violating Village Codified Ordinance 660.16B as a minor misdemeanor. Any subsequent violation within 1 year of the first citation, if convicted of the first offense, may result in a citation under Village Codified Ordinance 660.02 as a second-degree misdemeanor for failure to take reasonable efforts to limit the spread of contagion. If charged under the repeat offender specification, law enforcement shall, in the charging instrument, include the date of conviction for the first violation. Upon conviction of a violation of this section as a first or subsequent offense, The sentencing court may, in addition to or in lieu of the penalties provided in this section, require the person to complete community service as an ambassador for the village's voluntary compliance efforts or other public service related to pandemic precautions.
Okay. And before we ask for a motion, I'm going to read in section B, if Josue, you don't mind scrolling back up to that. During any pandemic emergency declaration by the village council, all persons in the central business district of the village and on village-owned property shall cover mouths and noses with a facial covering in the following situations. 1, when inside any indoor public place, if physical distancing is not possible. I'm recommending that change in line with other things we've done. 2, when waiting in line to enter an indoor public space. 3, when outdoors in public places, if physical distancing between individuals with only infrequent or incidental moments of closer proximity. All right, can I get a motion, please?
I move that, I move for ordinance 2020, was it 13?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, and a second?
Second.
Okay. Brianne, why don't you begin by talking about, sort of give us an overview of what this ordinance would do and sort of what we're trying to address here.
Sure. This ordinance is designed to work hand in hand with the resolution that was already passed. When I spoke to council staff, there was already some impressions under, whether it was media or just general information, that Yellow Springs already requires masks to be worn in the central business district. And of course, that's where most of the public interaction happens, and therefore there's a higher risk. So this ordinance works in conjunction with the resolution. What it's designed to do is the village additional enforcement capability, because the resolution, as some people have said, doesn't have teeth. Well, the teeth are, you've got to strike a balance between getting compliance and being punitive. So what we've tried to do is say, look, we understand people have due process rights, that there may be exemptions, and we don't have to ask what those exemptions are, nor do we have the legal capability to do so. But if someone is a village employee or a village police officer and sees someone in the central business district under these conditions, they can walk up to them and say, hey, where's your mask? Offer them a mask. And if they're not wearing it and they don't claim an exemption, they could be cited under this ordinance. Now, again, the goal is to achieve compliance, as Chief Carlson said. The other due process concern is we do not want an avalanche of anonymous complaints. Everyone has a right to face their accuser. So the department gets someone who says, this person, because this is an ordinance expressly targeting everyone that's in the central business district, that you have a right to face your accuser. If you're going to think that someone is not wearing a mask, that you necessarily don't have knowledge of what it might be, you would have to agree to serve as a witness against them. Now, the way it's designed, everything would go through mayor's court if it doesn't result in a written warning and an offer to wear a mask. However, anyone who goes to mayor's court and says, well, I don't mean any of the, still want my day in court. I want a trial, or I'm not satisfied with my ruling in mayor's court, so I'm going to appeal that, would then end up in Xenia Municipal Court. So that person who makes the initial complaint would have to agree to serve as at both levels. But because, again, the goal is to achieve compliance, the community service aspect of any sort of penalty would hopefully serve as a bit of a deterrent, that if someone goes downtown, doesn't wear a mask, and is a repeat subsequent offender, that they could face a just punishment, in that they're going to have to hand out masks or hang posters or do anything else that's related to pandemic protections. So That's, again, it's council's prerogative what enforcement capability you want, but this was drafted based on what from council at Monday's meeting and from staff warning. If you wanted to include an additional civil penalty as was done with the solicitors, right now a second offense would only be a minor misdemeanor, but you could include a second offense as a civil infraction and then go to the minor misdemeanor and then go to the violation of 660.02. But again, that's council's prerogative. Short notice, this is what we came up with.
All right, well, Brianne, I do want to thank you for working with everyone and I think really capturing many of the different aspects that were talked about on Monday and that have been of concern. It's a really good document for such a short time to put it together. Chief Carlson, I'm going to ask you to speak to this one next.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. So I don't have any specific language points. I guess to be blunt, my concern is the punitive angle. I understand that that's giving us more teeth. Our goal, again, is, resolution oriented on calls. I do like the language that will help dispatchers prioritize. So, and we will be working with them on lists of questions, things that they can ask. So it's not just a citizen-citizen interaction. And we also have to consider the equity issues that we deal with on a regular basis in the village. Our homeless population is up right now. It's particularly a group of that vulnerable 18 to 26. And so I would strongly suggest that we focus most of our attention on punitive toward civil rather than anything that creates the potential of a criminal record.
Thank you, Chief. Mayor Pam?
Even though we've been using the word ordinance, I'm wondering if we could go back to the vendors and the buskers philosophical approach here and make the first couple of offenses, in addition to the verbal warning and so forth, more of an infraction as far as potentially a waiverable ticket. They can come in, they've been hit a second time, they can come in as one might with a traffic ticket and pay it off with the clerk of court or at the dispatch window. And then on third offense on, have something more serious kick in.
Thank you,
So
Mayor.
I defer to the solicitor on possibly that language, Brianne.
I can come up with that language, but yes, absolutely. If council wants to see that, we can incorporate that.
Okay, just thinking of who our target audience may be in this situation, whether it's the teenage, early adult group, or whether it's people with a more political, oppositional bent to wearing a mask. I just think the ability to come in and pay a ticket would be a good place to start once an initial warning was given. I also want to just give a word to the history about public service and community service in Yellow Springs. I was warned early on that there can be liability issues involved with issuing public service sort of repercussions for offenses. And I've always brought my hammer of justice down as far as that's concerned with that in mind. In other words, it's one thing to ask a person to write a letter, make a phone call in my presence, doing a public apology or talking in a group setting with other people versus going out to pick up litter or trash or collect broken bottles, you know where I'm going with this, and then have some potential liability happen. So I want to keep that in mind, and maybe that's getting too far in the distance, but I would like a waiverable penalty in there at some point with a payment of a low fee.
Okay, thank you. Josue?
I share all the points that the values that everyone has shared. I think it's important to have an enforcement mechanism. I'm less concerned with some of the details, primarily because we have a great peace officer force that are resolution focused, and we're looking for compliance.
Sounds good, and I agree. All right, so
Brian, can I say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, and I appreciate your comments, Mayor, in total agreement. Just so everyone understands, the health department, public health department has police powers. If this escalates in threat level, one of the avenues that I would strongly approach, if we reach a situation which, you know, I believe with our officers and the way that we respond, we will be able to get compliance and mediate these calls for service. But there might be that one, you know, situation where the intent of the person is to create or start something, or it's a business that we are finding not in compliance. What I will advise the officers to do, rather than the Yellow Springs Police Department or the Village of Yellow Springs trying to acquire the most punitive damage possible, we would defer those in a memo to the Public Health Department, and they would take the situation from there. So I hope that gives a little clarity to any serious infractions that might occur. And again, I doubt that we will see those.
Okay, thank you, Chief. All right, council members, questions or comments, and I will start with Kevin. Is that a nothing? Okay.
Yeah, it is another. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm triple dipping. I'm in another call for work right now. I'm sorry.
All right.
I do support the ordinance as it stands.
Okay. Lisa Krieger.
So I guess it's no surprise that I'm in support of this, but one of the things that I really appreciate is that I've been calling for this, but I am not wanting to criminalize this. You know, I really just want to have compliance. And I do think that this is the necessary next step. I think it's proactive. I think it's great that we haven't had that many cases in the county and in the village and all of that, but we are not through this yet. And I think it's important for us to continue to be proactive and say yes to this requirement.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Laura Curlis.
So can someone clarify for me, this would apply inside the businesses?
If social distancing is not possible and the business is open to the public. That's one of the definitions we actually, the public places definition. So it would apply to
indoors and outdoors.
Indoors,
indoors
outdoors,
and outdoors,
wherever
and all the time.
Wherever the public is.
Yeah, this parallels what would kick in with that level 3 that we talked about. This is pretty much what the language that I saw from the Greene County Public Health email.
And if while you're clarifying, I've got a question here in the chat that can you clarify that this applies to the entire downtown at all times, regardless of how busy the sidewalks or the business may be?
Yes, as long as council has declared a state of emergency pertaining to the pandemic.
And then I think to further clarify, of course, you know, this is all connected to the physical distancing. So yeah, it very well could be that there are only a few people downtown and this ordinance would not require them to wear masks because they would be able to distance. Okay, so Yeah, Laura Curlis, did you have anything else?
Well, I have a couple of, I would make a couple of amendments, but the biggest one, bunch of amendments would be to the section E, the penalties section.
Yep.
And I guess if I'm understanding the system correctly, the level 3 is higher, is worse than level 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, it goes up to level 4. Yep.
I guess I'd be a lot more comfortable instituting this than like the day there was a level 3.
Okay. Mary Ann McQueen?
Yeah. So before, we actually didn't see this ordinance. I didn't see it until just about now, basically. I don't really like having to pass things that I haven't really looked at thoroughly. Before, I'm going to call up. Yesterday, I sent a list of questions to Josue and to the chief because I wanted to understand exactly when people, under what conditions people would be cited. And so I'm hearing, I think, that let's say a person's not wearing their mask and an officer comes up to them. This is the first offense. The officer tells them to put on their mask and they do that. Now, if someone's not wearing their mask and another person tells them to put on their mask and they don't, then I guess that person, the person who wanted them to do it would call the police department, but then that person would have to, let's see, would the officer have to actually, yeah, I think the police officer actually has to see a person not wearing a mask in order for the person to be cited. So in other words, someone could come into Tom's not wearing their mask or wherever, employee calls the police department, the person leaves, and so the whole enforcement thing is the thing that bothers me with a lot of other things too. Or sometimes I see people when they're wearing their mask and it's not over their mouth or it's not over their nose. So an officer would just tell them to put it over their nose. One thing I don't see in here, I'm not clear about if someone is biking downtown. I know if they're in a vehicle, they don't have to wear their mask, but if they're on a bike, they're biking through town. It's a question. I would like the answer to that.
Brianne, do you want to handle a couple of those? I think
And I have some other questions too regarding the ordinance. But.
I think Chief actually had a response to your email, but as far as that would be something that'd be council's prerogative, whether you want to make that, as it stands now, there is no exception for cyclists the way there is for a motor vehicle. But again, when you're on a bicycle, you're not moving as fast as you are on a vehicle in terms of passing through congested areas. So that's council's prerogative if you want to amend it to include or exclude.
I do not, but I think it needs to be clear.
But I'll defer to Chief for the other questions because I believe he had emailed.
Yes, I saw it. So
there is, I'm sorry, one question or one thing you brought up, Mary Ann, that I think we can address is it's contemplated in here with it being non-anonymous that a person can testify to the fact that they saw this. So, Brianne, am I reading that correctly? That
yes, if a person is willing to, again, this is the fundamental right that a person who's charged, whether it's a civil infraction or a criminal infraction, they have the right to face their accuser. So if someone makes a complaint and by the time police officer arrives, that person is long gone, but and I know the village is not exactly a hotbed of surveillance activity, but say you've got a store where it's an employee who's making the report and they've got, video at the register where the person was asked to put on a mask, refused, and caused an issue and then left the business. But then the employee thought, well, I better report that to law enforcement. They're still walking downtown without a mask, posing a risk to other individuals. That would be something to where the employee would be serving as an eyewitness. And if they have video from their business, or God forbid, even like a cell phone video, they would be expected to provide that to law enforcement to serve as the basis for the investigation.
So then if potentially we could have one or more people sitting downtown taking cell phone videos or photos of people not wearing masks. They go to the police department, they know who these people are, maybe with facial recognition now they can find out who they are. They find these people, then the fact that they saw the person and that they have the evidence that that person wasn't wearing a mask is enough to make a case. Then it would go to mayor's court. And then the person who has the video or the cell phone photos takes them to mayor's court, and basically they provide that evidence at mayor's court. Is that right?
They can, absolutely. And generally speaking, when I've prosecuted such instances before, and a lot of times it's a minor traffic crash where a police officer's tied up on another, and so the drivers pull over to the side of the road, but they took cell phone video or they had a dash cam video that was a private vehicle conveyance, and they come to court and say, I took this video on this date, here's what I observed. And again, the wrinkle that you run into is that anyone who's charged, even before a citation, whether it's a criminal or a civil citation is issued, has the defense of, well, I'm exempt. And again, that could be problematic because we can't necessarily inquire as to documentation in support of proof of their exemption. But if dispatch is screening and says, oh, well, they're engaged in a sporting activity where they're all more than 6 feet apart, making a complaint, that is something that could be screened out, so it does not merit a law enforcement response. That's part of why we have to be specific with our exemptions. And again, going back to the cyclists, that's council's prerogative as to whether you want to add or subtract exemptions, but the exemptions that are listed there are based on the most recent guidance from the state and the county health department.
Okay, I have a question about the meaning in section B, number 3. I'm going to read it because it's not clear to me what it means.
Right.
For that, you have to wear a mask essentially.
Mm-hmm.
When outdoors in public spaces, if social distancing between individuals with only infrequent or incidental moments of closer proximity. I don't understand what that's saying.
This is where right now the CDC is saying, as far as infrequent and incidental moments of proximity, the minutes or seconds of potential exposure changes. So that's why it's worded the way it is, because we're going by the most recent guidance from our publics. When we started this, it was, have you been exposed to someone for longer? Now they're saying it could be even less time that you could be exposed. And I'll defer to some people and individuals that are on the call that have the medical background, but that can change. But again, the infrequent or incidental it's in passing. It is not a prolonged exposure to, again, like the example that you were asking about with cyclists. If someone whizzes by you on a bicycle and you were in total contact for 10 seconds, how likely are you to get COVID if they were just blazing by you on a bicycle on a bike path versus, as we were talking about with the earlier ordinance, standing in a stationary position, observing a performance of a 5-minute, 20-minute performance. So that's where the incidental or infrequent comes in, because it is a fuzzy standard, but it is something we could say based on the most recent CDC guidelines or whatever standard or benchmark that council wants to set it by.
Well, what I
Those
don't
are perfect
understand.
examples, Brianne. Those are perfect examples. So, I mean, another would be, let's say town is empty. And you see one person and you're one person and you just walk past each other. That's not dangerous. It's really not, right? So there is a degree of discernment about duration and distance. And I mean, when in doubt, wear a mask, right? But you shouldn't have to be, you shouldn't be afraid or accusatory of someone in that situation.
But okay. So this is saying, okay, I'm going to go down to Tom's. I live 2 blocks away. I walk down and I'm walking fast. I'm only by myself. I do not have a mask on. I walk downtown. If I see someone, I move over. I go into Tom's. I put on my mask. Am I in compliance?
I would say so. Another situation related to your example is you're getting out of a vehicle that's parked at Tom's. You don't have a mask on when you exit your vehicle, but you're putting your mask on as you're walking in the building and someone else is coming out and they are just passing you. I mean,
so this ordinance is not requiring people to always wear a mask when they're downtown.
No, it is, they have to wear a mask when they cannot socially distance downtown.
Oh, or when they can't socially distance for more than a second or a couple seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
Can I follow up on that real quick?
Yeah.
As I think I understand the intent of number 3, but the more I read it, I'm wondering if some words are missing. Because
Yeah, so I'd amend it after the word individuals to put in is not possible or with only infrequent or incidental moments of closer proximity.
That's clearer.
Okay. Marianne, anything else?
Yes. The last thing. Well, I guess I have 2 more things. C6.
Yes.
Okay. So I certainly get why restaurants want to be able to serve people outside. I totally get that. Oh, and inside. I mean, I see why restaurants want to serve people. But how is it fair that we're going to let people sit outside or frankly inside and eat and be, less than 6 feet from each other and likely less than 6, especially inside. And we're not letting people that are just walking around. Where is the fairness? And back to Laura's thing about everyone being treated equally. I don't get it.
So the primary objective for C6 was when you're talking about, okay, these are individuals, whether they're seated outside, inside, in the business district. If they're less than 6 feet from another person that's in their own group, such as a server, they have to keep their masks on while the server's there at their table. If someone else who is eating just on the sidewalk, we don't have an exception necessarily for actively drinking, and that's council's prerogative if you want to include that.
Well, I'll make one final comment. We have been hearing from many, many people about their desire to pass an ordinance. And what I'm gathering in the way that this is worded is that this still enables people to be downtown without wearing a mask. Maybe it's because there aren't very many people there, or maybe it's because they're by themselves and then just walking downtown and they're not hanging out with anyone in particular. So I'm not sure that that is going to satisfy the people that are concerned, who are wanting an ordinance. And I will stop now. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Marianne. Okay, I want to say a few things, and I'll start with officially opening the public hearing, and you know, we have comments from folks. Judy, quick question: do you still need to leave?
I missed it.
Okay, thanks.
I'm gonna have to leave at 3:30 though, because
Okay.
I did.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So first of all, one of the things that I want to reiterate that Lisa mentioned is that this ordinance is potentially being proactive. And I saw the question about, you know, what can we do in relation to the state in terms of being punitive or not? But I think specifically what's proactive about this is we are signaling to community visitors as well as Greene County Public Health how we want to see these situations handled. And so by potentially laying that out and doing it in a way that fits our village values, I think is appropriate. The second thing is I want to note that amongst the many differences with ordinances like the one in Dayton, we are allowing for not just business owners to make a complaint, but anyone that's witnessing something. And again, not being a vigilante, but funneling that through our peace officers. So I think not only are we being proactive, but we are also taking meaningful action to potentially address issues that are concerning for public safety. I think thanks for Marianne bringing up the bicycle and some of the other things that we will need to potentially address if we move forward. But the last thing I want to say is I want to personally keep community service in. And I think what resonates about it with me is that several of the folks that are potential offenders, a fine is not going to have an impact on them. And so I think there is a way for us to structure community service or whatever we want to do to fit the nature of the person who, you know, we're trying to get to behave better. So with that, we have a public hearing opened. Do we have any questions or comments from citizens? Okay, Karen Wintrow.
Yes, Brian, thanks. You know, I can support this. I think that I don't think that it's overly onerous. I think the interesting piece is, though, that people do now wear their masks outside all the time. I was downtown, and I know that the comments will start coming that no, that's not true. I was downtown yesterday, and it's always going to change depending upon the time of day, and every day is not going to be the same. But I saw 100% compliance with masks outside yesterday. Guy got out of the car, immediately put his mask on when he got out of the car. So I do find it ironic that we're pushing to pass an ordinance that has teeth, but yet it may very well end up having a little less impact because of the fact that there is less definition on the spaces that are required to have masks or the limitations. So, you know, people, we're now basically saying, yes, you don't have to wear a mask outside if you meet these particular things. So I find that a little interesting. I will continue to support the messaging that we've been putting out there for months now as to how to behave in Yellow Springs, and especially 2 months telling people not to come to Yellow Springs. So I'll support our messaging and how successful it's been. I want to go to the food situation, the eating situation, the physical distancing inside on private property. And I guess, although it is a business, I mean, this is covering businesses, the physical distancing at restaurants is covered by their health department requirements. So this shouldn't have to impact that. You know, I think probably the biggest thing I've seen, the questions I've seen are about the tables in front of current. I think that it's probably possible for them, if people are following the rules, I think it's possible for those to be distanced. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to violate that, but there's an opportunity for people to violate all of these. So I'm not very, I think we should leave it as it stands when it talks about the food. I think the way it is fine. And as a cyclist and a runner, I made the comment before that I would like to see the word organized being removed from exemptions, athletes engaged in a sports activity, just any athlete engaged in a sports activity. I don't know that it has, I'm not very organized when I jog, so keep that out.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Do we have any other questions or comments from citizens? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Josue, are you seeing anything?
I see comments and questions that have been asked prior to your overview of the ordinance.
Uh-huh.
I also see a hand raised from Megan Bachman.
Okay.
Would you like to read the comments on Facebook and YouTube?
No, I think if there's a salient question, it'd be great to bring that forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one that would be appropriate to address is, if we pass this ordinance, what happens when we go to level 3 in the misdemeanor enforcement that is set by the state?
Yeah, so, and I kind of addressed that before, but I think the bottom line is that from everything I've seen, there's not a lot of clarity around, while, as Chief said, that public health does have police powers, it's not clear how they would exercise those. And I feel strongly, based on what's been happening so far, that public health is going to defer to the mechanisms that we've set up and the approach that we've set up. And honestly, I think most of it, not all of it, falls on us anyway. So
to weigh in on that,
yes, Brianne, thanks.
because the public health alert system is only 5-6 days old now, we did try to include that language and note that, look, the village gets a lot of traffic from adjacent counties too. So it is council's prerogative to do this as a protection against public health. And I actually have the statutory reference here somewhere, but counties don't have the same authority. Townships don't have the same authority that the village does under home rule. So the village can say, even if Greene County's level declines, keeping our ordinance in place because Clark County is still an alert, or Montgomery County is still under an alert, or based on our Greene County Health Department stats, we are a hotspot within Greene County, even though any wide mask mandate in effect. So again, the village can impose that, and that's part of why it's put in as a permanent ordinance, that the village can say there is a pandemic public health risk, put on the facial coverings now and keep them on until we say otherwise.
Okay. Thanks, Brianne. I also, want to highlight that in past meetings, both Chief Carlson and Chief Altman have highlighted that they are often used as the resources for enforcement for public health. So again, a lot of just sort of how this plays out comes back to us and our peace officers. Chief, did you want to say something more about that? I saw you go off mute for a sec.
No, I was actually hanging up or sending a call to voicemail. But one thing that to maybe put a little clarity or something. I mean, on the one hand, the purpose for this in the end is for folks to wear masks and to not just make some of us feel more comfortable, but to keep all of us safer, healthier, and give everyone the opportunity to continue their life in the village as they see fit. Marianne, specifically to you, I know we've talked about some of the points that you brought up, but you guys know how the police department operates here. I mean, we have hiccups here and there, but I don't see us as this, massive enforcement mechanism or tool. I see something happening that will allow us to be able to leverage, if you will, in that mediation. And I still believe that we won't have the type of conflict that I think we all fear, just because of how we are as a village, how we are as a police department. My only concern of everything that we've talked about regarding this is the citizen engagement and the citizen testifying and such. None of us would want everyone running around with phone cameras and accusations and investigations. And so I think that we will play how we respond accordingly to the seriousness of the violation. If someone is asked to leave an establishment and they do, we're, problem solved. If an altercation begins, which I found mostly from citizen to citizen engagement, that's where we see things escalate. But we will handle them appropriately, and we will take the necessary steps to keep everyone safe and keep everyone happy.
Thank you, Chief. Megan Bachman, I believe you have a question or comment.
Thanks. Yeah, as someone tasked with explaining this to the public, I find the sidewalk piece extremely confusing. Are masks required on sidewalks or not? How are we really going to define infrequent or incidental? Does that mean two people passing each other? That's okay. What about one person stationary and the other person passing them? What about people getting stopped downtown? I think we've all experienced that. We think we're going to walk straight through somewhere, we get stopped. It's just, I think it's extremely unclear, and I would like clarification on that. Thank you. Or just requiring masks downtown on sidewalks at all times.
Okay. I'm not sure anyone's going to have a perfect response to that other than I think there's recognition that there is lack of clarity. And that could mean, that we could go a couple different ways with that. Ultimately, my sense is that just like everyone else that is doing these ordinances, you're going to be tweaking or, kind of figuring this out. But I think that's a great point to raise. I have
a comment to that, if that's
yes,
okay,
Lisa.
Brian. Because I hear what Marianne was asking and the lack of clarity, and Megan, thanks for seconding that. And, I'm reflecting that sometimes I don't see lack of clarity because I understand the medicine. And so that I just kind of know that. And then I forget that it's not clear to everybody. I see a future. This isn't going to go away. And I think all of us over time are going to become, sadly, more and more familiar with the ins and outs and the masks on, and all of that, and as was commented earlier, the whole action of putting a mask on and taking it off and putting it on and taking it off is problematic as well, because these, it could be droplets on the outside of your mask. So when you're touching it to take it off, you're then touching it with your hands and, all of that. So although it isn't necessary in 100% of cases to protect others by wearing a mask all the time when you're in the downtown business district. Perhaps just for clarity to the community, it's better to just say, when you're in the downtown business district, you wear a mask, and not try to say, you know, if you're just, except for when you're just passing someone, or except when you can do this or that. And for now, as we're in orange and heading towards red soon, I think we're just more clear with that. I think that's my recommendation at this point, given how people may be confused.
And that would carry on what the resolution says, which is when you're in the CBD, we want you to wear a mask. So,
Can I ask a question then? So would that amendment just be on number B3 to strike out if physical distancing between, et cetera? To just leave the front end of that sentence is when outdoors in public places?
I think so.
Okay, and then in section 1, then that is actually correctly stated, because your section 1 says one must do all 3 of those things without exception. I mean, except for the exceptions. The exemption.
Right. Okay, so any other questions or comments from citizens? Okay.
You want me to read the YouTube or Facebook?
Well, we have to start thinking about time at this point. So unless it's completely new or something related to how we're going to make a decision about this, then I would say we've got a lot of input already. Do you see anything? Okay, I'm going to assume then that I can close the public hearing. So I will do that.
I have another question.
Okay. Yeah, because we do.
Because I don't like this.
Okay.
So now maybe we're gonna cross out. I mean, we're changing it so we're gonna say people have to wear masks all the time. That's what I'm hearing, which I think that's the only thing that's the people who are upset with how things are going now. That's the only way that those people will, citizens, visitors, whomever, will be satisfied, because otherwise you have lenient, there's a lot of leniency in terms of when you, so if people are going to be wearing masks all the time, I'm going to come back to people eating. How is it fair that I can eat downtown and sit outside and not wear my mask? Where is the fairness of that when we're asking people, hey, I'm just walking around, I'm not hardly even interacting with anyone? Or do we just say it's not fair and that's life? And I'm asking Lisa, because I'm asking Lisa as her medical profession person.
Well, you know, I may then again defer this to legal counsel, but when I think about eating outside at a restaurant, I think that is restaurant related space, and those restaurants have been approved to open up for outside eating. And so, like, for example, outside of the Emporium,
I meant like sitting in front of Current Cuisine or sitting on a bench eating.
Well, I mean, I associate the tables that are outside of Current Cuisine as their outside designated seating. Now, it's partially in recognition of this issue of physically distanced outdoor seating to consume food, with seating that's intentionally placed at physical distance and marked away, that I wanted to talk about that plaza idea on the weekend when there's more congestion. It's in response to a clear need for more physically distanced outside eating areas. But when I think about people eating outside, I kind of think of that as associated with the restaurant, and it's just not a battle that I am ready to wage right now. And I don't know more about how to say that, but I do think that passing this ordinance is a significant move in the right direction without making it impossible to grab some carryout food and eat it downtown and put your mask on. That's how I feel. And that's a choice. Also, I want to say one more thing. It is your choice. It's a choice if a restaurant's going to put out outside eating. It's also a choice if you're going to choose to consume food too. So,
Yeah.
Can I ask if it would help your understanding or comfort level, Marianne, if a whereas is added in the same whereas that exists in the vendor ordinance that says Amy Acton signed director's Dine Safe Ohio order, it references that Dine Safe order, and we can drop that whereas into this ordinance to make clear that you're deferring to the state of Ohio regarding restaurant dining.
No, I appreciate you thinking of that, but I don't need that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it comes down to, we talked about this with the last piece of legislation, that there are two big issues. One is sort of just the limit of space downtown. And so at some point we're going to have to address tables, on the sidewalk, maybe. And then the second is this interplay between individuals. All right, so I would like to move towards, there have been several changes talked about. I'm going to start with some that I've heard, and then we can, I guess, start working through the process again. So I do think that the B3 about outdoors could just say what I saw Megan put in the chat, which is, except we'd say physical, when physical distancing is not possible. Brianne, do you see problems with changing that subpoint 3 to that?
I do not. I do think if you were to say if physical distancing is not possible and just all outdoors, period, you're running into, but as long as there's some acknowledgement that it's masks or physical distancing.
Right. And then I think similarly, I had a note that we would need to add to section 1, right at the end there, where after it says expressly for that purpose, but before the parenthetical, if they are not able to maintain a physical distance of at least 6 feet from non-group members.
Well, now I'm confused because I thought that you wanted to direct this to masks downtown, period.
Yeah. That's what I was hearing.
I had gone through and removed all that language that says if physical distancing can't, because I was hearing that intent. Can we clarify?
Yeah, I think it does clarify it. Laura, sorry, go ahead. You haven't said anything. Go ahead.
Yeah, I won't vote for it if we don't have that. I want people to be able to walk downtown at 6:30 in the morning and nobody's around and not wear a mask, or if they feel they can stay far enough away from others.
Yeah, I mean, this would keep it consistent with what the state and county do.
And that's where I took the language from. And as far as, again, I'm fine with the removal of intermittent or infrequent, because on June 5th, what the CDC put out, and I put the link in the chat, was that right now they're saying it's 15 minutes, but the triple asterisk is data are insufficient to precisely define the duration of time that constitutes a prolongure. Recommendations vary, but 15 minutes can be used as an operational definition.
Okay, so then we've got, it was raised about including bicycles with motor vehicles. I think that's appropriate because they are considered vehicles under state law. And then of course, all the social distancing becomes physical distancing. What am I missing?
number 7 under exemption C,
Mhm. Oh, yeah, the
just
sport.
cross out organize.
Yep, thank you.
And so I've changed back then to your section 1 then should probably read all persons within at least 6 feet separation from non-group members to regularly sanitize and or to wear a facial covering. Because you've just made it optional if you can distance.
Well, why not what I said right after?
What did you have?
So expressly for that purpose, if they are not able to maintain a physical distance of at least 6 feet from non-group members.
Okay, and I put that in a different section. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that was, I thought that could be added to section 1 to, it's wordy, but I think it says it exactly like what we're thinking. And then you caught the thing about a 10-year-old instead of 4-year-old earlier. Okay, so further discussion about amendments before we formally walk through those.
Well, I would be a lot more comfortable having staff and the mayor, the chief, Mayor Husway, and Brianne take this penalty section and make it consistent with, I don't mind being consistent with state law. If there comes a point where it's a mandated misdemeanor, at that point, then we do it. So, but the rest of it needs to be infractions with fines. I would just put a period at the end of community service. I wouldn't say what, let the mayor decide. I'd take out senior municipal court, but I don't know that I think there's enough changes in that section that I'm not comfortable voting without seeing what those are.
Okay.
And we have not heard from any business that would be affected. Like right now, the businesses, 70% of them like making their own policy and their own private property. And I'd really like them to have a chance to react to this. So another week or so, I think is worth doing to hear from them.
Okay.
The 2020-13 isn't particularly addressed to the businesses. 2020-14 is.
Well, but they got to wear, this applies indoors and like the whole food and some of us council people and experience that doing this is
Right.
like, okay, server's coming on, off, on, off.
Because there's currently the state law that business employees are supposed to wear facial coverings.
Yeah, but what about the public when they're in those restaurants?
That is addressed, am I correct, Brian, that you've addressed that if there's a.
Yes. Patrons seated at a restaurant or other establishment, provided they wear the facial coverings until served and until servers have attained physical distancing.
That's actually, yeah, the served language, I think is broad enough. I had a conversation with the owner of the Winds who said, our directive is people can take off those facial coverings as soon as they are seated, but she said they are immediately served. There's water in front of them as they are seated. So I think you're covered either way there. Because they have been served water the minute they sit down. So it doesn't put the restaurant in the position of having to make people wear a face mask until their hors d'oeuvre arrives, for example.
Okay, Karen has had something to add to this point too.
Yeah, I have been in communication with the businesses. I've advised them of this particular meeting. I think you may have had one letter from a business in your packet for the Monday night meeting. What I'm hearing from businesses is that most of them are adhering to this already. And I think that we've heard enough. I've heard enough from the businesses that I think that most will be okay with this. I think their biggest concern is to be in a policing situation. They don't want to have to be in a punitive situation or a dangerous situation from the standpoint of enforcement with their customers. And they don't want to be in a situation where somehow with their action, would potentially come back, or lack of action would come back to be punitive on them if perhaps a customer wasn't adhering. So I think that the modifications that have been made, I think that you're going to get probably a majority support from the business community on this.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
I think that this is a significant health issue. That's why we're having this emergency meeting. That's why we've all been working so hard on this. And I want to move forward with a vote today.
Okay, so then let's run through our amendments and then we'll take a vote. So let's see. Judy, do you want to tee them up and then we can get motions? It seems like you've got the best track of these.
Oh, I am
Nope.
wary of that perception, but
Okay.
I've got section 1. The change is to add the words, if they are not able to maintain a physical distance of at least 6 feet after the word purpose to section 1, and to change the age of the children to under the age of 10.
Okay.
So those are changes to section 1.
Okay, so let's stop there. Can I get a motion for that change?
I move.
Second.
Second.
Okay, and Judy, if you could call the roll, please.
Stokes,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Hausch.
Yes. Okay. Maybe we'll work together on this, Judy. So a second motion that I would like to make is to change anywhere we say social distancing to physical distancing. I have those all noted. And this is in line with the language that we have used in all our other legislation related to this. Is there a second? Okay.
Second.
And Judy?
Okay, Hausch,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yeah.
McQueen, yes. Curlis,
Yes.
Krieger.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. What do you have next, Judy?
I have, and I hope I've got this correct, under definitions B, number 3, when outdoors in public places, if physical distancing is not possible.
Yes, that's what I have too. Can I get a motion?
I move.
Second.
Okay, and Judy, the roll?
Stokes, okay, Stokes,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Hausch.
Yes. Okay, next I have under C, exemptions. We need to update the first one to say under 10 years old.
Yep.
Can I get, so that's a motion. Do I have a second?
Well, do you want to do, Brian, all of the exemptions in one motion?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Why don't you go through those? That's great.
So under exemptions, I have a number 1, the age is changed to 10. Number 7, the word organized is struck. Number 8, the sentence adds the words "and cyclists" after the words motor vehicle.
Okay.
I just thought of another exemption that at least I want to bring up. What if you have a family or housemates or even a group of friends who consider themselves a pod and they don't have masks on?
It's already
Well,
covered.
Yeah, we say non-group members in section 1.
Oh, okay, I didn't get that.
Okay. Okay, so I'll make the motion for those changes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Okay, I heard Kevin. And Judy, the roll, please.
Yes. Stokes,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Curlis,
Yes.
Hausch.
Yes. Okay. And then I believe the last one is related to section E, penalty. Oh, actually, no, we have something in section D. So Laura, you had a motion to take out mayor's court, municipal court, right?
Right. I don't want any of these cases going to Xenia.
I agree.
That's not going to be something that can be done, because if someone appeals from mayor's court, that's where it will go, whether it's a civil infraction or a misdemeanor.
But that's part of our normal process anyway, and that would be the caveat at the start of the trial if they don't like, or the arraignment if they don't like my conclusion, they go to Xenia.
Yeah, so if it's a misdemeanor under state law and the officer charges it under the ordinance, under the revised code, it'll go to Xenia. And not that they intentionally do it, they mistakenly do it sometimes. I'm just saying we've got it. This is why at this point, I think this whole section needs to be nuanced more and made less punitive in the sense of criminalization. And that's where I'm getting stuck right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're charging under this ordinance, which does include this language, they are by definition charging under village ordinance.
Well, Judy, it's a lot more complicated, because what I would do instead of the second violation being a minor misdemeanor, I'm not voting for it if that stays in. But at the moment it becomes a misdemeanor under state law, I want it to be a misdemeanor under our law so it can come to mayor's court if it's charged correctly.
That is ordinance, all ordinances. That 66002 is a village ordinance.
No, I know, but if there's a companion ORC.
There isn't.
Well, but if the state's mandating it, it'll have to be under the ORC.
That would be that would be a health department violation. The 66002 is village ordinance that doesn't have a companion one.
What I'm saying, what I heard from you, which I don't quite understand at the state level, is that at some point it could become a misdemeanor mandated by the state. Right? Did I hear that?
The violation of the mask ordinance?
Yes.
No,
That-
this is purely a local ordinance.
No, but if masks are mandated by the state, like the governor mandated them in Montgomery County.
Right, and the Department of Health and local police could charge that violation of revised code, but that would not necessarily go to mayor's court, and it would not necessarily be a criminal offense. That's too new. There's been no guidance whatsoever on violations. Again, it's only 6 days old, but the local ordinances are all designed to start and end in mayor's court. The issue becomes if someone doesn't like their decision in mayor's court or they want a trial, it goes to municipal court. Municipal court has jurisdiction then.
Yeah, that I know, and that's okay if they're exercising their right. I just don't want it to go there as a matter of mistake or choice.
Yeah, it wouldn't, because it'd be charged under the local ordinance.
Okay, so I think I understand why D is going to not change. So let's get to the penalty. And Laura, I'm assuming that we can do something similar to what we did with the prior ordinance there. So, I mean, I would advocate for the same approach unless we need to do something much different on this one.
Well, I definitely want a second infraction to be a higher fine, not a minor misdemeanor. And I definitely don't want any subsequent violation. And I would say not within 1 year, but within 2 months, because, partly record keeping, partly if people are going to be a frequent flyer, they're going to do it within a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't want it to be a second-degree misdemeanor.
Yeah, I think we should go the civil route again. So could you run us through just what your motion would look like to improve this section?
Starting with a documented second violation with, I would say within 2 months, if observed by law enforcement, or confirmed through an investigation, complaint, or warning, may result in a citation for violating, I suppose that code section is okay, as an infraction subject to a fine of up to $30. And I would say up to, because I'm thinking of our homeless, that we have some certain persons who aren't homeless, but who couldn't afford $30. And I think that's up to the mayor. Any subsequent violation within 2 months of the second, I would say second citation, then I'd strike if convicted. No, if convicted of the first offense may result in a citation under village codified ordinance. And I'm not sure why the section changed there, is Brianne, but it's subject to an infraction subject to an infraction up to a $50 fine.
Okay.
So you'd be taking out the reference to the ordinance 66002 that's already on the books.
No, I guess that you've got the numbers changing. I just wondered what was that intent,
There is no minor misdemeanor offense. We're creating one. That's 66016B.
Yeah, well then I take,
Civil infraction and then a minor misdemeanor, which is waivable, just like a parking ticket, because it's a fine only. But the 66002 is already on the books as a second degree misdemeanor,
yeah, I don't want it to be a second degree
part
misdemeanor.
of the village codified ordinances for a while. So
Oh,
if you want to
yeah,
take that
sure.
out, I mean, that's council's prerogative.
Well, see, I don't know exactly here in these minutes, and Judy's got to go, how to do this. This is why I think it needs to be looked at.
Okay, well, let's go with, so we said first citation up to 30, second citation, both of these infractions, 50. And then is there anything left after that?
I think we could leave it, we could just strike everything else and then see if it becomes a big need to have some penalty for a third infraction.
Okay, that sounds good. And then I liked what you said about just end it after community service,
Yeah.
because that also is the mayor's purview. Okay, so Laura, was that a motion then?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I have
I'll
a
second it. I'll
Okay.
second it.
And Judy, if you're still here, if you can call the roll?
Yes. Curlis,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Ausch.
Yes. Okay, so now, anyone want to make a motion about the amended ordinance?
So did
I
you close
move.
the public
Sorry.
hearing? Sorry, I
Wait a
just
minute.
have,
Judy had a question, sorry.
did you close the public hearing at some point? I just need to
I
make sure.
did, I
Thank
did,
Thank you.
before we talked about this. Okay, Lisa?
Mm-hmm. I move for this ordinance as amended.
Okay,
Second.
and Kevin seconded. Judy, if you could call the roll.
Curlis,
Yes.
Krieger,
Yes.
McQueen,
Yes.
Stokes,
Yes.
Ausch.
Yes. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Yeah, it's amazing to be able to do all this and come together, but very important. All right, we have a last piece of legislation. My understanding is, based on the way we ordered this, is that we now maybe do not need to worry about that
That's
third
correct.
ordinance.
That's
I would
correct.
say
Yeah,
it's
Yep.
not
Okay.
that it's, however, this particular ordinance is broader than just the central business district. This would
Right.
pertain to every business within the village if council wanted to consider it. But given that the urgency was the central business district, we were asked to bring an alternate ordinance covering all businesses in the village, and specifically addressing law enforcement, that there may be rules that if the business asks them to wear a mask might present problems and that sort of thing. So if anyone wants to elaborate on that, I don't know that it is necessary to have a vote on this particular ordinance, or if it can be modification and iteration if council decides that the need is necessary to address this within the village.
Okay, thanks, Brianne.
Yeah, it was I who asked for this ordinance, and in light of this other one, I think for now we can hold on this one and see if, what happens.
Okay. So
There's
then,
a question about when this goes into effect in the chat.
Judy, you want to explain that?
Yeah, so I just will explain that this is passed unanimously as an emergency ordinance. The emergency ordinance is going to affect immediately.
Okay. So I think, we've got plenty ahead, plenty to continue to improve. I want to thank everyone for stepping up and really appreciate that we're continuing to think of more ways to keep our community safe that'll actually work. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon.